The concept of fallibility is far less controversial. It's generally recognized that the complexity of the world in which we live exceeds our capacity to comprehend it. I have no great new insights to offer. The main source of difficulty is that participants are part of the situation they have to deal with. Confronted by a reality of extreme complexity, we are obliged to resort to various methods of simplification, generalizations, dichotomies, metaphors, decision rules, moral precepts, to mention just a few. These mental constructs take on an existence of their own, further complicating the situation. The structure of the brain is another source of distortions. Recent advances in brain science have begun to provide some insight into how the brain functions, and they have substantiated Hume's contention that reason is the slave of passion. The idea of a disembodied intellect or reason is a figment of our imagination. The brain is bombarded by millions of sensory impulses, but consciousness can only process only 7 or 8 subjects concurrently. The impulses need to be condensed, ordered, and interpreted under immense time pressure, and mistakes and distortions can't be avoided. Brain science adds many new details to my original contention that our understanding of the world in which we live is inherently imperfect. The concept of reflexivity needs a little more explanation. It applies exclusively to situations that have thinking participants. The participants' thinking serves 2 functions. One is to understand the world in which we live. I call this the cognitive function. The other is to change the situation to our advantage. I call this the manipulating or participating function. The 2 functions connect thinking and reality in opposite directions. In the cognitive function, reality is supposed to determine the participants' views. The direction of causation is from the world to the mind. By contrast, in the manipulative function, the direction of causation is from the mind to the world. That is to say, the intentions of the participants have an effect on the world. When both functions operate at the same time, they can interfere with each other. How? By depriving each function of the independent variable that would be needed to determine the value of the dependent variable. Because when the independent variable of one function is the dependent variable of the other, neither function has a genuinely independent variable. This means that the cognitive function can't produce enough knowledge to serve as the basis of the participants' decisions. Similarly, the manipulative function can have an effect on the outcome, but can't determine it. In other words, the outcome is liable to diverge from the participants' intentions. There is bound to be some slippage between intentions and actions, and further slippage between actions and outcomes. As a result, there is an element of uncertainty both in our understanding of reality and in the actual course of events. To understand the uncertainties associated with reflexivity, we need to probe a little further. If the cognitive function operated in isolation, without any interference from the manipulative function, it could produce knowledge. Knowledge is represented by 2 statements. A statement is true if it corresponds to the facts. That's what the correspondence theory of truth tells us. But if there is interference from the manipulative function, the facts no longer serve as an independent criterion by which the truth of a statement can be judged, because the correspondence may have been brought about by the statement changing the facts. Consider the statement, "It's raining." That statement is true or false, depending on whether it is, in fact, raining. Now consider the statement, "This is a revolutionary moment." That statement is reflexive, and its truth value depends on the impact it makes. Reflexive statements have some affinity with the paradox of the liar, which is a self-referential statement. But while self-reference has been extensively analyzed, reflexivity has received much less attention. That's strange, because reflexivity has an impact on the real world, while self-reference is purely a linguistic phenomenon. In the real world, the participant's thinking finds expression not only in statements, but also in various forms of action and behavior. That makes reflexivity a very broad phenomenon that typically takes the form of feedback loops. The participants' views influence the course of events, and the course of events influences the participants' views. The influence is continuous and circular. That's what turns it into a feedback loop. Reflexive feedback loops have not been rigorously analyzed. And when I originally encountered them and tried to analyze them, I ran into various complications. The feedback loop is supposed to be a two-way connection between the participants' views and the actual course of events. But what about a two-way connection between the participants' views? And what about a solitary individual asking himself who he is and what he stands for, and changing his behavior as a result of his reflections? In trying to resolve these difficulties, I got so lost among the categories I created that one morning I couldn't understand what I had written the night before. That's when I gave up philosophy and devoted my efforts to making money. To avoid that trap, let me propose the following terminology. Let's distinguish between the objective and subjective aspects of reality. Thinking constitutes the subjective aspect, events the objective. In other words, the subjective aspect covers what takes place in the minds of the participants. The objective aspect denotes what takes place in external reality. There's only one external reality, but many different subjective views. Reflexivity can then connect any two or more aspects of reality, setting up two-way feedback loops. Exceptionally, it may even occur within a single aspect of reality, as in the case of a solitary individual reflecting on his own identity. This may be described as self-reflexivity. We may then distinguish between two broad categories: reflexive relationships, which connect the subjective aspects, and reflexive events, which involve the objective aspect as well. Marriage is a reflexive relationship. The crash of 2008 was a reflexive event. When reality has no subjective aspect, there can be no reflexivity.